Hey, Soul Tribes, this is Solstice here, and I am here with my very good friend, Sam Bevans, who is with us from Israel. And he has just launched recently a course on Korean natural farming. My channel is about how I stay youthful. Part of staying young is always being curious, learning something new. I have a degree in landscape architecture and environmental planning, and yet permaculture is a whole other animal in terms of gardening and growing food in a way that is not only good for Mama Earth, but super good for our bodies because they are full of high density nutrients. Those high nutrients means that you'll be eating high frequency food, which will help transform your mental health, as well as supporting what I call your spiritual hygiene. So thanks, Sam, for being with us here today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
yeah, this is so good. Yeah, so tell us more about Korean natural farming and why is it different than other permaculture modalities?
Yeah, for sure. So for starters, Korean natural farming, the name itself is very misleading, or at least so I've found when explaining it to people who aren't familiar with it. Um, it really has nothing to do with Korea itself, and it does have to do with natural farming though, so that's the beneficial part. But the Korean part, it was discovered in Korea by a guy named Master Cho. He was able to go ahead and figure out by pairing certain couples of microorganisms and starting to brew different types of ferments and tinctures and so on, that he was able to tap into this unseen microbial world and start interacting with it in ways that we've really never been able to do before as farmers. Like the types of things he was able to do were things that, usually people would need a lab and scientists and degrees and a lot of expensive equipment to do. But he was able to figure out how to interact with this world with very simple techniques, simple principles that are all able to be used on a really low cost. So Korean natural farming in a nutshell is basically a regenerative form of agriculture using indigenous microorganisms in order to build up the soil, to build what we like to call living soil, basically meaning that you've now created soil that's so microbially dense and so microbially populated that now your soil is literally alive. It's teeming with life. It's teeming with microbes. And now they're actually like bringing your soil from an inanimate or like a so on quote unquote dead object, which would basically just be decayed plant matter, so on and so forth, into now a living organism that is able to interact with your plants and everything like that. So that's kind of Korean natural farming in a nutshell there.
Oh, I was going to ask you how you got into it, but first, now since you talked about the microbes, that there's something that I've learned, I read somewhere about microbes actually being like an anti-depressant. Do you know much about that? Like, because they just talk about just being able to put your hands in the dirt, like into the earth, like actually helps you to not be depressed. Do you know much about
Yeah,
that?
yeah, for sure. There was an article that came out on it. I think it might have been last year, 2019 or 2018, where they realized that yeah, soil microbes are actually able to produce produce the chemical reactions in your brain that release serotonin. So not so like similar to dopamine, serotonin, for those of you who aren't really familiar with it, is more of the long-term mellow joy kind of feeling. Dopamine being that like short release, like woo, I got a chocolate bar. Serotonin being like, oh, I love my family. So it's kind of like that kind of concept. So basically, it realized that these microbes are able to do that, and I'm not exactly too sure like how they were able to test this exactly. Like I know they used like more cutting edge technology, and this wasn't done just by some farmers. But what we do realize as people who study Korean natural farming is that our bodies being made up of these microorganisms. So when I say microorganism, I need to back up a little bit. The microorganism is a very, very generalized topic to explain hundreds of trillions of different little microbes that are all over the place. And there's hundreds and hundreds of different families and species of microorganisms, ranging from fungi all the way to bacteria, algae, nematodes, all that kind of fun stuff. Um, so what we're talking about here is using the indigenous microorganisms, but cultivating them in like a balanced state that's going on already in your garden. Um, So what's happening here is like you're taking these indigenous microbes that are all around you. You have these indigenous microbes living on your body, and they're not just living in these like isolated bubbles where they're just kind of chilling out, like, on an island. Like these microorganisms are constantly interacting with each other. So that being said, we have the microbes on our body, in our body. Our bodies are basically microbes. There's a very small percentage, or not small percentage, but there's a very relatively smaller percentage of human cells than there are microorganisms that are clearly like an alternate living organism that are on our body. So that being said, when our body touches soil, or it touches plants, or it touches trees and stuff, a lot more is happening than just our body touching it. The microorganisms on our hands and in our lungs, everything, when we breathe in, like these microorganisms are constantly interacting with the microorganisms in the world around us. So when we touch the soil and we're working in the garden, like we're interacting with the microbes in there, and it seems like that has a chemical reaction in our brain. It actually impacts like the way we feel, and it allows us to actually feel this serotonin release, and it allows us to feel this sense of peace, I guess you could say.
So it's kind of an as within, as without, like, because when your gut microbiome is out of balance, that actually affects your mental health,
Yeah,
and your mood and things like that, they've shown. And so it would make sense that outside in the garden, on the earth, that also has an influence on the balance there, having that balance. So it sounds like the natural farming, Korean natural farming, helps to balance that microbe in the external world in your garden. And then when you're out in it, walking barefoot or getting your hands in it, then you're really helping to balance yourself mentally and
yeah,
emotionally.
exactly. And I think that that could be like one of the key words of what Korean natural farming is, and it's really creating balance with nature. And the concept of like when you go back to Master Cho's like teachings, unfortunately I've never had the privilege of training with Master Cho, but
Mm.
I was able to get to know a guy named Drake, or Eric Weiner, depending on how you know him. But either way, he's one of the head Korean natural farming instructors in the world, and definitely one of the top people in the United States. And he talks about this story about how Master Cho describes Korean natural farming, and he describes it as like a symphony, or it's like music. And it's the concept of, if you were to just have too much of one instrument, or one plays too loud, one plays too quiet, it can throw off the complete sound. It can sound totally off. You can have this imbalance. You're like, oh, this same instruments that I love in the other music, but now I'm hearing them played wrong and they sound horrible. And like that kind of concept. And basically saying that when we're going out there and we're working with building this living soil, is we're trying to build this symphony, and we're trying to create this balance, so that way it creates like a harmonic tone, and that harmonic tone in turn would show as healthy plants, healthy soil, and healthy insects in your garden, so on and so forth.
Okay, so I want to get back to that, but first let's just find out how you got into Korean natural farming. Um, just a little bit of background. We actually met when I lived on the Big Island of Hawaii. Sam and I, we actually met at this place called the Warm Pond, which actually doesn't exist anymore because the lava has now completely covered up that pond. It doesn't exist anymore, but we did meet there. And I was with my friend Jenny. Hi, Jenny, if you're watching this, I'm sure you're
Up,
going to be
Jenny.
watching this. Jenny is just awesome. We were like giggling and just playing, and like, because there's a place where the channel of water comes in, and we were like laughing. And I think that's kind of how we ended up talking, maybe because we were just being silly girls, but we were having a good time. And then in some kind of synchronicity, we actually ran into each other on the other side of the island, which is like 3 hours away from where the warm pond is to the island naturals. But of course, when you're all into like natural health, then that's why you
Yeah,
would run into each other again, right? Because it's a small
one on
island.
the whole. Yeah,
It's a
when there's
big
only
island,
one.
but a small island, right? But we ran into each other again, and then he invited us to go to this really unique experience down in Waipio Valley, which is where he was caretaking this property and doing food forestry for this property down there. And he took us to this waterfall, which is like, what was it? How high was that waterfall? Like 2,000 feet or something? Like,
Don't remember the exact height, but yeah, I think it was
it,
like around.
It's a
It was
really
the
high
biggest one.
waterfall and a really unique, like nobody else was on this trail because you have to know a local to even like, so he was our local guide to even allow us to get into that. So it was really an extraordinary, like epic experience. And then I got to come back again and enjoy just staying overnight at the property that he was living on for 2 years. And that was one of the most extraordinary places I have ever like been. Like, and I've traveled a bit, not like everywhere, but yeah. And it was like what 16 waterfalls. It was like at the very back of the valley. So we were like at the very back of YPO Valley, which I'm sure many of you know what YPO Valley is or where that is, but it's really hard to get in there to begin with. And then we go way back in there, and we were like picking, what was the name of that leaf that we were doing some
The tea?
yeah, the tea leaf. What was the name?
Mamaki.
Yeah, so
Mamaki.
he made us this fabulous tea. I was with another girlfriend that came to visit me, and we had there's waterfalls everywhere, and then there's a river, like, and the deck floated out over it, and so there was just like all of this like negative ion energy and just this incredible, like, I don't know, the vibration, the frequency there was just so high. I was so high the whole time, like, and I had the most crazy dreams, and like it was just a really really cool spot. So that's how we met, and now Sam currently lives in Israel, and from what I hear, the vibration of the kibbutz, is that how you pronounce it, kibbutz?
Kibbutz. Yeah.
Yeah, kibbutz. Okay. Where he currently lives now is like super high vibe, similar to that place that we were at in YPO Valley. Is that? And you're living in a dome, right?
I don't live in a dome, but it's the house is made out of mud. It's like a mud hay bale house, but
Okay.
not just like, like a mud hut. Like I have full electricity, running water, like, a shower, like, it's all the amenities of a normal on the grid house, except for it's just made out of sustainable material that holds up a lot better in the desert.
And that's where you're doing the Korean natural farming, right? Currently.
Yeah, I'm doing the Korean natural farming out here and in the desert right now.
Okay, so tell us how you got into that, how you
Yeah,
discovered it.
for sure. So basically, I started off doing, like actually started off really with like, when I was a little kid and, my mom teaching me just about having house plants and just kind of like an interest in having plants around. So there was like an early like kind of interest in plants. But when I got older, it kind of came around. I started doing landscaping, and like I was working with hydroponics and aeroponics, and pretty much any style of organic farming you can really think of. And like it all was cool, but at the same time, like none of it really was like, yeah, this is the way to do it, because like every time I'd be like, wow, this is so cutting edge, and then you look outside, you look at a forest, you look at nature, and you're like, but that's not how that's doing it, and that's way more efficient than what I'm doing, because I'm doing way harder work over here. So then I started learning about food forestry, and there was this video I watched about the Kauai food forest out on the island of Kauai in Hawaii. And basically the guy was saying is like, no one comes out and waters a forest. Like, you ever see anyone watering or fertilizing trees or plants in a forest? And I realized, I was like, no, you don't see that. And he was talking about how compatible planting helps, and by layering your plants and planting closer together, you help with water retention. The plants of the higher level will help fertilize the lower level plants, and so on and so forth. And you create this like symbiotic relationship of plants. And so that was like, okay, I was like, wow, this is amazing, and got really into that. But even still, there was like, there's still something missing. Like, what's the factor that holds all this together? Because I would see things that would just be like, like, what's going on here? Like, that's not explained by just basic organic farming. And then I met this guy named Drake, and it was really random because I was at the Hilo Kava bar in Hawaii, and basically I'm sitting there and I see a guy next to me with this bright orange hat. And he's the guy from the Nako video. If any of you guys know Medicine for the People, he does like a music video, and he has a bunch of people in it, and like they're all passing around this sign, like, I believe in the good things coming. And I'm like, hey, that's the guy from the video, like, because you can't bright orange hat, like, it's like it's it's like so bright. Anyway, besides the point, I'm like, I see him, I'm like, hey, what's up? We start talking, and then next thing you know, it turns out that he's dating one of my other friends. And I was like, wait, what? Like, small world. And I was like, you guys need to come down to YPO and come check out the property that you so eloquently described earlier. So they came down there, and they also thought it was really amazing. And we started talking about Korean natural farming, and Drake kind of like showed me how to make a couple of really basic fertilizers. And that was it. And I was kind of like, okay, that's cool, whatever. It was like, it was useful. I was using the basic fertilizers, but I hadn't really, sorry, it's a fly, hadn't really tapped into the real knowledge base that I had really kind of come across. It was like the tip of the iceberg, and I didn't really realize what was there. And then I started doing research more and more on fungus and on mushrooms and how to grow mushrooms, because I was curious, like, well, maybe I could start growing some edible mushrooms. They'd be really interesting. Give that a try, because that's a whole nother type of farming that I'd really never done. And then only to realize that, wow, like these mycelium and these microorganisms are freaking amazing. Like, these are the backbone of like all living things on this planet. It's like the vital systems of the planet. It's like a supercomputer. It's all these things that every single living thing is dependent on, yet very few people talk about, or very few people know about. And so right after I figured that out, I call up Drake and I'm like, hey man, when's your next workshop? I need to get certified. I need to get trained in this. I want to do this. And, for sure enough, he's like, oh, I got one coming up next month, bro. And so I was like, oh, perfect. So I went and took a workshop with him. And fortunately for me, he was helping me gear it for desert agriculture, because I was getting ready to come out to Israel. And, we went to the workshop. We spent a lot of time talking, like, in between classes. I did a lot of research, about like the material that he released, and material on his website, and other material put out there by a lot of people. And started doing, and started like, really fielding this stuff and understanding it. And got to the point where, now that I've taken the time to really go through the research, really talk to Drake and understand what we're doing here. Now I'm able to say, like, I'm certified in Korean natural farming. I'm basically level 2 certified. I'm still waiting on Drake to finalize the online paperwork, but with the way the world's going, it's crazy. But got all the actual like work done. I just need to get the certification for it. So Drake, if you're watching this, certification level 2. So
this is how we
way,
get things done.
Exactly. We put a podcast together, and that gets people to move. Anyway, so yeah, so now, so that was that, and just kind of got into natural farming, and now I'm out here in Israel sharing it with as many people as possible, because no one in this region of the world really knows what it is. It has kind of like, it's wrapped around from the US all the way around Asia and Australia, and like, like the Philippines, South Pacific, even India and places like that. And it's reached around like in Europe and stuff. But, once you get to like, like Mediterranean Europe, and you get to Africa and the Middle East, and like, we get this like dead zone where there's like no one really doing this. So I've been coming out here, and I'm basically trying to share this with as many people as possible. So doing workshops and training courses and all sorts of stuff, and getting people trained up in natural farming.
Cool. So if someone is interested in your course, how would they find out about it?
Yes, so there's a few different ways. I think the best way, though, is to go to my regional Facebook group. There's Korean Natural Farming, regional community, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. Or you can just do the short version, which is just facebook.com/groups/KNF Israel. And that'll bring you there. And then on that page, I have the link to the video course and a little trailer, so you guys can kind of see what you're getting into before you check it out.
So if they're not into Facebook, because I could just put, a link in my description here with my channel. If they're not into Facebook, it's a link that they can go to without needing to be on Facebook, right?
Yeah, no problem. I'll put the
Cool.
link, just that link for sure.
All right, cool. So tell us about what you're doing there on that farm. Like, how are you balancing greening up the desert there?
So yeah, it's been really different, really different coming from YPO, because for those of you who aren't familiar with YPO, it's classified as a rainforest, and now I live in a desert, so literally the exact opposite. And it's funny because it's also a valley where I live. It's called the Arava Valley, It's like in southern Israel. It's one of the hottest deserts in the world, actually. And it's basically just a giant desert valley. And so been out here and working with these amazing people here at Kibbutz Lotan with a program called it's called, well, basically they have a few different things. Their actual organization is called EcoKef, the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, or excuse me, the Center for Regenerative Agriculture. Oh shoot, there's too many centers out here. They all have like similar names. Either way, though, they run a center. Oh, the Center for Creative Ecology. That's it. Sorry about that, guys. Either way, though, they run that out here. They have a place called EcoKef, which is basically just a big like enclosed area that they took. They took in a piece of like land that used to just be raw desert, and they started planting it and growing it up and using permaculture techniques. And I believe they've been doing it now for about 30 years, give or take a few years. And basically over that time, they've developed a climate in the middle of the desert, which is technically subtropical. Granted, it's still a desert outside, so the rain and everything's a little different, but inside it's basically a subtropical climate. And I jumped in with them and started teaching them about Korean natural farming, and basically sharing what this stuff is and how it can be plugged into their already existing system. So I don't really want to come in and say like, yeah, like I came in and started greening everything up here, because what they had already done was really amazing, and that's a big reason why I actually chose this place. So mainly what I've been doing is actually focusing on ways to retain water, to get salt out of the soil, or start to lock it up and get it to the point where it doesn't impact your plants. Also working on ways to get like high quality biological fertilizers that really focus on water retention. That's been really a big one lately. But as far as greening everything up goes, like what we've been doing is we've been plugging it into their already existing permaculture garden. And they have an amazing permaculture garden, by the way. And basically, we've just been plugging in IMO, and we made basically like loads and loads of this stuff, what we call IMO 4, or Indigenous Microorganism 4. And it's basically the fourth and final stage of creating what I like to call evolved indigenous microorganisms, where you basically send them through this relatively intensive evolutionary process that allows them to really become stronger, what we like to call leader microbes. Um, so we've been spreading that all over the place, and basically taking their permaculture garden, which is an amazing like foundation, and started just loading it with these beneficial microorganisms. And the results in a lot of ways have been like, you get higher water retention, your soil starts to become a lot more active, in the sense of now like you don't need to add in as much fertilizers, because the microorganisms actually work on breaking down plant matter and minerals and all different things, enable in order to give your plants what we like to call like bioavailable nutrients. So these microorganisms, literally, they go into the soil, they break down all the different stuff that's in the soil that might take like, a lot longer to break down naturally. And since we've gone in and we've added so many more of these indigenous microbes, they break it down faster. It helps to fertilize your soil. So that's kind of like what we've been working on. But I think the biggest one for me really is the water retention, because we're out here in the desert where it's getting, like on the really high end, we've had days so far that I think it was about a 110 Fahrenheit, or 40 something Celsius. So yeah, we get some pretty hot weather out here. And I went outside in my garden, or my old garden that was pretty well established with microorganisms, and like after digging about like a half centimeter, like like just a little bit down, the soil was wet. And this is in full sun on that hot of a day, and it's extremely dry too. So it's not just hot and like humid, it's very hot and dry.
So do you have to water it? Like, or is it just from the rain that it's holding all that water retention, or how is that possible?
So, yeah, so we use drip irrigation. I
Okay.
wish I could say it was from the rain. We don't get enough rain really.
Right.
Um, I am working on a method though that basically is a garden bed that harnesses like morning dew and different moisture from the air, and then stores it in natural reservoirs inside of the garden. But that's a whole nother story for another day. But basically, yeah, we have like the drip line, and it runs through the garden beds, and basically it'll drip in the morning, drip at night, and then, the microorganisms do their trick. And one nice thing as well about that is because not only do the microbes help to retain the water, but they help to like distribute it. So like, I can have like, one drip line in the middle of the garden bed, not reaching either end at all, just running down the center, or either side, I should say, not end. And then the microbes will actually take that water and distribute it throughout the garden bed. So you'll notice like your water gets distributed more evenly as well. So yeah, these microorganisms, like really, they're just amazing when you get them in your soil. They really take a lot of the load off of you and just make your life a lot easier.
I did not know that microbes distributed water like that.
So,
So we're talking like little bacteria, like, moving water around, right? Like that's what you're
yeah,
talking about,
but
right?
they do it very similarly to how we move water. Just like us. And that's why the evaporation rate, or a big part of why the evaporation rate goes down. Because it's like, for example, like if you were to take some water and pour it in a cup and leave it out in the sun, it's going to evaporate relatively quickly. But if you were to take water and drink it and store it inside of your body, it's going to evaporate a lot slower. And that's literally what these microorganisms do. And since we have like, trillions and trillions of these little microbes that, like unfathomable numbers, there's so many of them that just by the act of them drinking the water, they hold it in their bodies. And either when they die, that water gets released, or when you literally waste, or they have like a urination or whatever, and they get rid of the product. Or I don't know if exactly if they urinate, but material. And that will have water in it or moisture in it. And also like the microorganisms, they also release very beneficial nutrients in their waste actually. So it's more like little chemical factories than it even is like waste at that point. But either way, they hold the water within themselves, and then they distribute it because they're naturally moving all over. So when they move, the water moves with them, and then they die and the water goes. And since there's so many going through life cycles so quickly, like what we just see is our soil just stays wet, and that's just how it looks to our eyes.
So how do you produce the microbes and then spread it out on the land? Like, is it just from like cow waste, or, like cow manure or things like that or
No, we actually have like a pretty well thought out process, and it was really actually kind of like ingenious when you think about it. But like I'll go over it very briefly, but we go over it more in the workshop or the online course. But basically, you take rice, and we take the rice, excuse me, put it in a box, put that box in the ground in your garden or in your local forest or whatever. And what happens is the microorganisms in that area, they colonize on the rice. And if you get a collection of primarily white microorganisms or white mycelium, then you've gathered beneficial indigenous microbes. So fortunately for us, nature makes our lives a lot easier, and white in the microbial kingdom means beneficial. So you don't really have too much guesswork. You can just kind of look at it. You're like, yep, I got a white collection. We're good. And then you take that collection and you use it to inoculate a very large pie, or not very large, but depending on how big you want to do, anywhere from, you can do anywhere from 20 to 50 to 100, 200, 300 pounds or whatever. And you take that initial collection and you put it into the big pile. You add in a few other different nutrients to help to stimulate those microorganisms, and then they inoculate your big pile. And then that heats up, but you turn it to keep it under a certain temperature, so that way it doesn't go anaerobic and it doesn't get to the point where you start breeding harmful bacteria. And you basically get this large pile of living microbial dust, basically. It's like, we use wheat bran here in Israel. In Korea, they use rice bran. But you basically just take this organic carbon powder, or this carbon structure, or carbohydrate and carbon structure, and you inoculate it with these microorganisms, and then they move into it, they feed on it, they live in it. And as the pile heats up, they spread, and then the pile cools down, and then they go to sleep, and then they're dormant, and they're inside of this dust, or this like dry material that looks really similar to compost. Actually, it's just usually a lighter color depending on what you use. But then once that's done, you now have this like preserved dust that's loaded with beneficial microorganisms that are all indigenous to your garden or to your local environment. And when you take just a few handfuls of that dust and you sprinkle it out on your garden, just literally dusting it, like, not even a centimeter thick, like just spreading it all over. What ends up happening is, like, you just spread all these dormant microbes. The second they hit your soil, they come out in the water that's already naturally in your soil, and then they start to spread and they do their thing basically.
So is this something that people can do? Like, they don't need a big farm like you have there in Israel. They can just do this. If they take this course, they could be able to like create this sort of, like, especially where I am currently, like I'm in Utah, which is, there's this northern Utah, which is a high desert, or southern Utah, which is a desert. So this is like being able to retain water is like a huge importance. Like, yeah. So instead of just, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, can people be able to like do this in a small space versus like a large farm, like if they take your course?
Yeah, for sure. Korean natural farming is extremely scalable. Um, there's people doing it, on little balconies in their home gardens. There's people doing this on, like 600-acre farms. Like, it's really up to you on how you want to scale it. And also too, like, we just went over IMO, or the indigenous microorganism process. And that's one of the more complex stages of Korean natural farming. But what I teach is pure KNF. So it's like one of the many factions, I guess you could say, of Korean natural farming, or the Korean natural farming world. But it's one of the larger ones and one of the recognized ones. So basically, like, in that, we broke everything down to 9 core solutions. And these 9 core solutions range not only from, the microorganisms themselves, or these indigenous microbes, but we have things like, like lactic acid bacteria, which is very similar. It's the stuff that you find, in cheese and yogurt and kefir and all that stuff.
Right.
But we are able to breed like a very diverse family of it. So you're not just getting one strain of lactobacillus, you're getting loads of strains of it. So it's really beneficial probiotic, great for your plants, great for your soil, great for your body. We also have these
So,
different
okay,
things.
wait, back up here. So you're saying you don't even need to ferment, like if you were to garden this way, you wouldn't even need to ferment food like kefir or vinegar or whatever. Like, you would just eat a tomato that's grown this way and you would get the beneficial micronutrients, or the microbiome would, like the probiotics. That's what I'm saying.
Um, I guess I've never really thought of it like that. I mean, technically, the 9 core solutions are all edible to humans, and basically, yeah, they cover pretty much all the essential nutritional needs for a plant and for a human, even, actually. So as far as that goes, I mean, yeah, you're getting a way higher content of microbial activity on your plants for sure. But like I was saying, like, we have 9 different solutions. So one of those is actually a fermented plant juice. So we do ferment things, actually. But the fermented plant juice is a way to create, like, a fertilizer, but it's also a way to extract bioavailable nutrients from any plant and store it in a liquid form. So, like, in a way, this is a farming style, but since we're talking with your show and everything, with Soul Tribe and all that, it's a health show. So we're talking about, people are caring about their bodies and their wellness. And Korean natural farming is actually a lot about taking care of the body. And, we're not just focusing on plants, but plants have a body, and they have like a basic needs that their body needs to grow and to be sustained. And a lot of those are really similar to our body. So when we're making these fertilizers, just about all of them are actually very beneficial for your own health. And fermented plant juice is definitely a personal favorite, because you're taking brown sugar, you're using osmotic pressure from the brown sugar to extract all the nutrients that are inside of the plant cell. So let's say you take something like, like a lemongrass, or no, let's go with fermented fruit juice. Same concept, but you take strawberries, something super good, super tasty, a lot of fruit, and then you extract all the nutrients, all the liquid out of the strawberry into this, into your brown sugar mix, and now you have a fermented plant juice, and it's super sweet. And you can just take, like a couple teaspoons of that, and that's going to be like eating like a bunch of strawberries, because it's all this dense strawberry nutrients that's just preserved in this sweetener. So when it comes
Wow.
to people at home, like, you could use fermented plant juice as a way just to get, beneficial nutrients as well as a sweetener in your smoothie at home. You could just pour this in and you can make this out of anything, fermented plant juice or fermented fruit juice, like literally any plant or fruit you can make this out of. So it's a really beneficial one. Then we even have one that's called a water soluble calcium phosphate. This stuff is great for teeth, nails, hair, all that stuff. It'll help with it growing and staying stronger, and bones even, actually. So a lot of these things, like, they definitely go beyond just farming.
Wow. And is it simple? Like, is it not that much? Is it super time consuming to be able to like do all this fermenting and put it in your garden? Or is it not that much? Once you get it, it's not that much more effort. Because I
So
mean, the thing I like about permaculture is its efficiency, like you were talking about, like yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so it's like yes and no. Like, so basically the initial, like, I'd say your initial like couple weeks, 2 3 weeks of like getting everything together and like making all the 9 course solutions and everything, yeah, that can definitely be a little bit time consuming. It's not going to take you like all day every, like, for like 2 weeks to do this. Like, it'll take maybe like, just a couple hours here or there to set aside time to do it. But at the end of the day, the goal is, once you have the 9 course solutions made and you're implementing them, you're using very small amounts of most of them because they're all concentrates,
Mm.
or most of them are concentrates. So, usually you're using anywhere from about like, 5 to maybe like 30 40 milliliters of said concentrate, for, like a backpack sprayer that you're spraying on your field. So so they last you for a very long time. And the other thing too, that is the main thing, is that since we're creating living soil, over time your soil is going to become more and more healthy and more biologically active, and basically meaning that you're going to need less and less fertilizer, less and less nutrients to basically stimulate it and to keep it going. So, like, I'd say for the initial, like, like the initial year or so, you want to be on it and be out there like a normal farmer, and like, taking the time to go fertilize and take care of your plants, and like, really be out there and be active with it. But you'll notice that, as time goes on, you can start to spread out the time that you go and fertilize and you go and do things, because now these microorganisms are taking over and they start to regulate your garden and start to take care of your plants for you. And once the event, and eventually you get to the point where, all you really have to do is go out and basically harvest. And, if you want, you can weed your garden depending on how you are. But, if you're growing like large trees, like, this guy, Chris Trump, he was one of the first people to do commercial level Korean natural farming. And I believe he only fertilized about 2 times a year. At least that's what I was told. And he would fertilize once before harvest and once after harvest.
Wow.
And
That's
that's because
amazing.
his farm was so, yeah, it was just so biologically active that his trees were super healthy. They were growing strong. He had great fruit, great yield, but he didn't have to be out there every day, like working the land and everything. And since they were trees, he was able to let the grass grow underneath it, and it just created its own ecosystem. And yeah, he was out there very little time, and it was able to just go and just get the fruits and, fertilize a couple times a year. And one time, actually, there was like a blight that came through the islands, and a lot of macadamia nut trees got really sick. And sure enough, his trees did not, because the trees still had a healthy microbiome, and, the microorganisms were still taking care of the plant because they weren't so focused on, heavy pollutants or heavy chemicals being poured into the soil that they have to break down. So they were able to do their natural role, which is take care of life.
Yeah, that's what I heard, that healthy plants actually don't need to be sprayed for like aphids and things like that, because what happens is that there's almost like the plant puts out a pheromone when it's sick, and it almost says like, hey, I'm dying, just put me out of my misery, like come kill me. Like, that's when a plant is unhealthy. But when it's healthy, then the bugs stay away. You don't need to be constantly on top of the pest control, because the natural world just only comes in and destroys things that are sick.
Yeah, and it works really well too, because, if you get the style down and you're able to like keep that balance that we just talked about at the beginning of this, then you'll notice that, you're not going to have the same aggressive bugs coming in. You're going to notice different like plants will start sprouting in your garden that might not normally have grown there before. For example, like, we had like out here in my garden here, after fertilizing it for a while, not only was it like, the soil was doing great, but we started getting different things that no one was planting that started sprouting. And I was like, well, where are these things coming from? All these different like plants that, normally wouldn't be growing in a desert. And I realized like, they were coming from the bird droppings, but the birds were there for years before I got here, and none of the plants were there. You know what I mean? So we realized that, the birds were dropping the seeds all the time, but the seeds could never germinate because the conditions weren't right. And the same thing goes for like, different bugs that come into your garden. If your soil conditions aren't healthy and you have like a really heavy bacterial environment, or you have a lot of harmful microorganisms in your environment, you'll notice you're going to get different bugs, and you'll get bugs that are cleaners and bugs that you don't necessarily want near your plants. And then what'll happen is, the more those bugs come in, the more negative bacteria they bring with them. And then you start getting the spiral effect of, your plants start to get sick, the bugs grow on your plants, and you have this whole issue, and you're like, what is going on? And, it's like, it's because like your foundation wasn't solid to begin with. And when we're using all these chemical fertilizers or even organic fertilizers, we're not taking into account that there's like a very subtle ecosystem happening here that is the pinnacle of whether or not your plants live or die. And when we say like, yeah, screw that ecosystem, we're just going to load it up with as much fertilizer as it can possibly handle to make it just super robust and vibrant. And if any bugs come on it, we'll just spray it with pesticides. And that thinking doesn't really work long term, and it's not really like efficient, because if we start focusing on building up the soil from the basics and from the foundation, then you start to change the insects that come. And what happens when the insects change? Well, then you start getting different birds and different critters that might eat those insects. And the next thing you know, like, just because you started one farm that you'd made like a totally bioactive or biologically active farm using beneficial microbes, now you've literally impacted that entire region, and might have even started bringing back some, old animals that might not have been there, but or have left the environment or decided that it was no longer hospitable to them. Because a lot of things, it just comes down to their conditions. Like, if the conditions are good for something to grow in, a lot of times it'll grow there, even if you don't think that thought doesn't necessarily make sense. Like, if, like, we're in a desert, but I had like nettle pop up in the middle of the desert, and nettle is not a desert plant. And that it doesn't make sense, but because the conditions were right, the plant was able to grow. And that kind of thing will start happening with more than just plants. It happens with all the different levels of life that's built upon.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to segue about our bodies. Like the same thing, like if we have all the beneficial microbes in balance in our bodies, then we're not going to be prone to disease. It just boosts our immune system. We're going to be able to like yeah, it just keeps that. We're not going to be like, viruses and things are not going to like start to form or grow in our body, or cancer cells, whatever, like, because everything is in balance, because we already have a robust foundation in a similar way that you're describing with the soil.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like the key to health. It's like understanding that like your body naturally wants to be healthy. Nature naturally wants to grow and to thrive and to be robust, like, so when you start to realize like we're the ones who are actually like offsetting that, and it's not like maybe your body or your genes or whatever, it's like it's choices that have been made by you or by family members over the course of a long period of time that literally will impact your genetics and impact your body's well-being. Because at the end of the day, these are just organic bodies that are made up of loads of different microbes and different organisms that do depend on that balance to survive. And it's a very fine balance that's required for so many different organisms to work in such a way that creates a human being. Like, when you really think about it, like, we're amazing complex systems of, like, I don't even know, I don't want to throw a random number out, but I'll say thousands and thousands and thousands, probably millions and millions, but like all these different organisms that are literally working together in order to let us do what we do, to be us, to be a human, like just to move your hand or to drink and to for your body to even know what to do with the coffee or the water or whatever you just drank. Like that's a system that's doing that. Like you're not sitting there thinking like, okay, liquid go down esophagus, like turn right at like, at kidney, like, you don't have to navigate that. Like you drink it and you're like, oh, I'm good. And your body knows what to do with it. And that's because you have this complex system that's working. And when that system is taken care of and it's understood and it's respected, then yeah, like you start to notice health becomes the norm and disease becomes the abnormal.
Very cool. And then something we were talking about before about the difference between doing this type of farming or gardening for yourself personally versus just going to the store and buying organic food. Even though that's really good, like it's the density of microbes and the density of nutrients is much higher when you farm this way or when you garden this way and eat the food directly that you have not only put your hands in the soil. Like isn't there something like even when the soil can even read your body? Like I've even told that you put your own saliva into the seed and like it talks about so that it will produce what your body actually needs to be a healthy body.
Yeah, that's definitely getting into a really big topic. But yeah, in short, yeah, definitely. Like the soil, like not the soil itself. Sorry, this fly is like trying to get around. Like, if you
I
see me,
was
just
gonna
wait.
film this outside, and I thought we have these cedar gnats, and I am just eaten alive. Like, and I'm like, I can't sit outside. I'll just be doing this the whole time. Like, I've got to be inside as much as I wanted a cool mountain view, of the desert here, but it's not happening. But anyway, um, so
But yeah, so when you touch the soil though, like in short, there's like this thing called the Mycelium Network, and it's like basically like a super highway of information, very similar to the internet. But basically, it's like a internet that's way more complex than the internet that we know, and it forms in a way that's very similar to our brains, all the way down to the way it sends electrical signals. So literally, there's basically like a brain in the earth made out of these microorganisms. And when we touch it or we interact with it or we're in it, because it's in the air, it's literally all around us. Like when we interact with it though, like per se with the soil, yeah, it's literally, it takes a scan of your body and it's able to really understand like, okay, like this is this person and like this is their health and this is their needs and whatever. Of course, like this gets into a science that, we've hardly scraped the tip of the iceberg of, or even learning how to understand how to interact with it. So, I don't want to like get too much into it because it's really like no one really knows for sure kind of a thing. But at the end of the day, this mycelium network we do know has a recording of you. Basically, it has a scan of you, it knows you, and when you interact with it, it updates that and it can help to give your plants or whatever the need or the nutrients that they need to provide your body the sustenance that it's requiring. So yeah, so there's like that way. But and another way too is like when you're working with your plants or you're working with these microorganisms that we're putting in our soil, just getting your hands in them and everything, like the microbes on your hands are going to fall in, and it's going to start to get into your soil, it's going to start to interact with your plants. So just farming in general, whether or not you're doing Korean natural farming or you're just doing a home garden, just touching your plants, interacting with your soil, weeding your garden, like that kind of stuff is getting your microbes into your
and
soil and
sending
making
it love.
love. And as funny as it is, like it's like it sounds silly, but at the end of the day it's not. Like like giving your plants that attention and like the nurture and like that caring, and like not necessarily, you don't need to go out there and like hold your plants like leaf and like tell it like how much you love it every day. You can, but yeah, exactly.
give it
But it
some,
has,
give it a little healing energy.
yeah, but it has been proven that by talking to your plants or acknowledging your plants at the very least, like acknowledging them as a sentient, like aware being, that they do tend to grow better and they tend to be healthier. Um, and that has a lot to do with the fact that they are aware. They're not as dense as we think they are. Plants are very active. And that being said, like when we interact with them, when we touch them, when we work with them, like they do become familiar with us and they're able to start to produce in a way that will be more beneficial to our bodies. And at the very least, though, you're getting the local microorganisms that are in your backyard. So you're eating like, you know, macrobiotically. So you're getting all that stuff that's in your environment. So you're helping to boost your immune system, and you're helping to boost your body in a way that is actually applicable to where you are. As to where when you go to the grocery store and you buy the food, like whether or not you go organic or non-organic, it's still going through international shipping. So like, you know, a lot of the food, for starters, it was grown in like a stressed environment, so to speak. And then a lot of it had to be harvested way too early in order to make sure it didn't ripen and and rot before it actually arrives at the destination. So basically, you know, you have that whole thing going on. And then on top of it, if it did get shipped, like they have to scan it with the UV lights in order to make sure that you don't get any harmful microorganisms, of course, into the environment that it's going to. So that kills all the microbes that are living on it. So at the end of the day, you're just getting like the core basic nutrient content of your plant. And like, you know, I'm not saying that's like, you know, don't eat organic, don't eat store-bought food, it's going to kill you, it's horrible. I'm just saying, like, it's not the high quality stuff that you're going to get from a home garden grown organically with, like, you know, your love, your time, and hopefully using Korean natural farming techniques and getting those indigenous microorganisms in there, so that way your food is actually like probiotic, you know. So it's like it not only has microorganisms on it, but it actually has like a well formulated mixture of probiotic solutions, basically.
So how is Korean natural farming different than just other permaculture modalities that are out there?
Yeah, so Korean natural farming is different than pretty much all farming techniques in the way that it's like more of a tool belt. So like, you know, if you were to take, you know, other farming styles, like they're more built around how to farm and how to, like, you know, how to do everything from point A to point B. But when it comes to Korean natural farming, like if you were to go study with Master Cho, you can learn like full Korean natural farming, and this is how you farm in Korea, and this is like all the techniques that they do, and it's an amazing style of farming, but it's not really applicable internationally. So we focus on these 9 core solutions, and it basically turns Korean natural farming into a tool belt. And so instead of, like, you know, being like another farming technique where, you know, it's like a farming style, this is how you farm, Korean natural farming is like farm however you want to farm, but here's the tools that you need to access this greater microbial kingdom that you probably won't be able to access otherwise. Because, you know, even in permaculture, like they do things like compost teas and a lot of other stuff that gets like microorganisms in your soil, but the microorganisms that are bred in a permaculture environment are a lot different than these collections of microorganisms that we're gathering from Korean natural farming, just because Korean natural farming is gathering such diverse cultivations of microbes that we're not just getting like the microbes in manure or the microbes in like food compost or this or that. We're getting microorganisms that are literally like forest microbes or desert microbes, or like the microbes that are dispersed all over your environment, and not necessarily just the ones that gather on specific types of substrates, whether it's manure or compost or whatever. So
Wow,
yeah.
that's really cool. Wow, this has been enlightening for me. You know, like I said, I have a degree in landscape architecture, and I've you know, dabbled in my own organic gardening, and I'm big on efficiency as a big part of it, because I don't want to spend all of my time just gardening. I have other things that I'm interested in doing, many other things that I'm interested in doing along with, but this has been amazing to talk to you, Sam. Obviously, you're a wealth of information, and I'm sure your course is really informative. It's obvious that you know what you're talking about. It's amazing. Yeah, so if you're interested in signing up for his course, like I said, there's going to be a link in the description below. And also he talked about his Facebook page. So yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to say, Sam?
No, I think that, yeah, that sums everything up, at least about Korean natural farming. But thank you for having me today.
Yeah.
I'm happy that we got to do this, and
Yeah, I love
yeah,
talking to you, Sam. It's so fun. We could
Yeah,
talk about
likewise.
all kinds of things. Like this is just one of the many things that Sam is into. The list goes on. We could go anywhere with, conversation. He like knows how to do massage. Let's see, what else are you good at? It goes crazy. Yeah, it's similar to me. Like, what do we call these people? Like, there's a word for like people that are just multi potentialites, I think is the word now, like where you have so many interests. And but it sounds like this Korean natural farming is one of your big passions, one of the things you really want to focus on, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it gives us a way to interact with the building blocks of life itself and start to actually be able to create a response to all the craziness that we're seeing in the world, at least environmentally. It's a way to bring or at least to give nature a fighting chance and to work with it instead of working against it.
Yeah, it's very empowering. Yeah, and it
Yeah,
sounds very transformational to be able to work in the garden, work on the earth with in this way. So yeah.
yeah, it definitely changes a lot of thinking, or at least the way I thought, at least that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sam. So if you want to see more informative like videos like this where I'm going to interview other people, just go ahead and subscribe and click the bell button. And yeah, so thank you, Soul Tribes. Catch you later. Bye,
See
Sam.
ya.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, bye.